Thank you for coming on this drizzly morning to an Oceania semester presentation. I'm Chad Stebbins from the Institute of International Studies, and we encourage you to take our survey at the end of this talk. You'll be entered into a drawing for a $1,000 study abroad grant, so the more events you attend, the more surveys you complete, the better opportunity you have to win that $1,000 grant. And you can find the information inside the Oceania semester brochure. There's a QR code you could scan. There's also a URL. The event code that you would have to enter following this presentation is 3336. 3336. So please take that survey at the end of this talk. So we're pleased to have Dr. Lamont Lindstrom, who is chair of the Department of Anthropology from the University of Tulsa, with us today to make three presentations. This one on the Kava drug, 11 o'clock on cargo cult, and 1 p.m. on volcano tourism. You have to come back to hear what that's all about. So with the Oceania semester, we have been focusing on Australia and New Zealand. But there are 14 countries that make up Oceania. And so today with Dr. Lindstrom, we're going to turn our attention to one of those other 14, a country called Vanuatu, which consists of some 80 islands in the South Pacific. And Dr. Lindstrom has made around 20 trips conducting research to Vanuatu. And so I'm interested to hear about a place that I'll probably never get to. Dr. Lindstrom has been at the University of Tulsa since 1982. He's had a long and distinguished career, written several books, journal articles, given presentations everywhere. Has a PhD from the University of California at Berkeley. Not sure how he ended up in Tulsa, but anyway, please join me in welcoming Dr. Lamont Lindstrom.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for the invitation, and we'll get going with the first of my three talks. If anybody wants to come to all three, you're welcome. It may be too much Vanuatu by the end of it all. I wasn't sure how long these class periods go on, so I've got way too many slides. So I apologize for flipping through quickly a number of them to tell the story about Kava. So we'll start off today with Kava, which may or may not be a new global drug. So back in what was it? Oops, I've turned this thing off here. I should know. Back in the 90s, a couple of colleagues and I published a book called Kava, the Pacific Drug. It was pirated by a New Age press. We never saw any royalties. It was put out again as Kava, the Pacific Elixir. And at the end of the last chapter, we predicted that Kava might be a new world drug spreading outside the Pacific where it originated and gaining popularity in other places around the world. So I brought in a couple of our predictive quotes here. And I think we were mostly right, as we'll find out today. So, and Kava, and there are a number of other plants that have suggested possibilities that they too could spread. I don't know if anybody's heard about khat. It's big in Yemen, where there's a war going on at the moment. Probably originated in Ethiopia, and it's used in places around the world where Arabic migrants have gone into, but it's not much yet used outside that particular community. Hoodia was in the news about a decade ago. It's a succulent that grows in the Kalahari Desert of southern Africa. It suddenly became popular, but mostly as an appetite suppressant, as a way to lose weight. And the botanists were concerned that every single Hoodia plant in that desert would have been scraped out and pulled out, and the species would go extinct. I think it wasn't all that successful as an appetite suppressant, but it's one of several plant substances which have, for a variety of reasons, come to attention here and there. The first time I saw kava outside of Vanuatu, I was driving from Oklahoma back to California, and I stopped at a truck stop in Arizona, and they were selling something called Black Fire, the Kava story, as a kind of pick-me-up, I think, to truckers. I thought that was strange, so I bought a couple of bottles. Didn't hear much about it until I went back to Vanuatu again. So what is kava? Well, it was domesticated probably in northern Vanuatu, so it's part of my Vanuatu story, but it came to European attention in the first voyage of James Cook, who was a British explorer, did 3 trips around the world. On his second trip, he brought along a natural scientist named Johann Forster, who was the first officially to describe kava. He called it Piper methysticum, which means intoxicating pepper. And here's a lithograph by the artist on board about a kava ceremony in the Pacific island country of Tonga. Cook and Forster there. Also in the Pacific, for some background, there's another substance that is popular called betel nut. It's a combination of the palm kernel of the areca palm. You cut it open and you eat the kernel inside, mixed with piper beetle, which is a vine, either the catkins or the leaves, or sometimes the vine itself, plus lime, which people make from burning up seashells and coral, basically. And whoever discovered that particular combination, nobody knows. Betel nut, here's the vine, here's the areca cashew palm. If you chew betel, it turns your saliva red, so there are all kinds of famous photographs of bloody mouth betel chewers from around the Pacific. It's also popular in Taiwan. If anybody's been to Taiwan, they have all these betel nut stands staffed by women, in scantily dressed women. It seems to be the local Taiwanese custom. So here's my map. Betel nut seems to have originated on the Asian continent and then spread into various parts of the Pacific, the northern Pacific, and then down as far in the southern Pacific, down through Papua New Guinea as far as the Solomons, if you can see there. Kava, let me go past these maps here. Kava is a second traditional drug substance. One of my colleagues who wrote that Kava book with me is a botanist named Vincent Lebeau. He's done many kind of chemical studies and botanical studies to make an argument that Kava originated in northern Vanuatu. And from Vanuatu, it too spread throughout the Polynesian part of the Pacific. So if you've in the seminar here, in the series here, if you've been talking about Fiji and Samoa and Tonga, and as far as Tahiti up to Hawaii, all of those are kava, or were kava using cultures. It's a piper, so the plant is a member of the pepper family. Looks like this. According to Lebeau, it probably comes from those northern islands in the Vanuatu archipelago, so that's Pentecost area, Maivo area, and from there spreads. And he's traced its botanical connections to a wild pepper plant called Piper vishmani, which people still use today in their folk medical systems. So, although it doesn't have the same physiological effects that kava itself does, so the theory is that people are messing around. They show up about 3,000 years ago on canoes in these islands, and they look around to see what the plant species are, to see what's useful. And they probably recognize Piper vishmani, which grows throughout that region. And they use piper vishmani to treat a variety of symptoms, and they just get one, which doesn't give them the horrible headache that piper vishmani gives. And they, over the years, keep on cloning and cloning and cloning and developing a better version of vishmani, which turns into today's piper methysticum, which people also continue to use for medicine, but they use it to kind of in religious activities to contact ancestral spirits. In lots of religious systems, one way to contact the spirit world is to alter consciousness. And Kava doesn't alter your consciousness very much, but it gives you a kind of happy, peaceful feeling, as we'll get into in a minute. So in addition to its medical uses, its original medical uses, people turn to it for religious purposes, and then thirdly, just for recreational, because they like the effect of the plant. So you can find kava today in Fiji. If anybody's had a chance to go to Fiji, they call it yangona there. Usually if you're staying in a Fiji hotel and if you find the taxi drivers, if you find the taxi rank, they've got a big kava bowl going, and you can sit down and join the taxi drivers in drinking yangona. It's used in Tonga. I lived in Hawaii off and on for a number of years, and one place I could find kava in Hawaii, in Honolulu, if you'd go down to Kapilani Park on Friday night and Saturday night, there would be these big Tongan church groups who would form these kava circles, and they would have a ta'u dancer, a traditional woman dancer, in the middle of the circle, and they'd have a couple of other women preparing kava, and if you just sat in the circle, somebody would give you a cup of kava, and in return, you would get up and put a couple of dollar bills on the dancer. And that was one of the ways in which these Tongan church groups would raise money for a variety of purposes. Anthropologists call these systems rotating credit associations, basically. Samoa, so anybody gets the chance to go to Samoa, you can find some kava in Samoa. And a couple of decades ago, if I was going down to DFW Airport, Eustis, Texas is not far away, and there were some Polynesian Samoan stores down in Eustis, Texas that would have kava on sale, powdered kava on sale. And of course, Vanuatu, where kava originates. And I actually have a little show and tell today, so if anybody's interested, here is a packet of, oops, I didn't know I was still mic'd up. Here's a packet of kava. This is from Vanuatu. And here's some open kava if you want to know what it smells like. Feel free to pass these around if anybody doesn't mind running through the auditorium here. So I didn't know anything about kava until I went to Vanuatu for the first time in 1978, a long time ago, and I to do some research on one of the islands in this chain, Tana. And on Tana, as almost every place else in Vanuatu, the end of the day, or the day concludes in a kava hour. And men, not women, because back then and still a bit today, men monopolize consumption of the substance of kava. At the end of the day, men would gather at these kava drinking grounds, and somebody would bring some kava from their garden, and they would clean it. So they'd kind of dig a plant out that afternoon and bring a plant or two down to a kava drinking ground, break up the branches, because like most tropical crops, kava doesn't produce viable seeds. It's cultivated by cloning. So what you want to do is you want to save the branches from the plant that you've just dug up so that you could plant the branches, and each one of them will grow into a new kava plant. And this actually leads to fairly rapid domestication, because if you bring a kava plant to the kava drinking ground and you drink it and everybody has nasty headaches or you don't get drunk on it, doesn't seem to have any effect, you just let those branches rot. But if you've had a nice kava experience, it's really nice kava, I really feel it, it's great, you rush back up to your garden the next morning and you carefully plant out each branch that you've taken off of that original plant so that you'll have 15 or 20, new kava plants to drink in three or 4 or 5 years. So on Tana, unlike much of the other islands of Vanuatu, kava's processed by chewing. So you, if I get this going here, you dig it up, here's a kava plant, you're saving the branches, and then hopefully you have virgin boys to chew the root. Or if there are no virgin boys around, the old guys can chew it. And what you can't do, at least on this island, is as soon as you're sexually active, you can't touch the chewed cud anymore. So if there are not enough virgin boys around, the old guys have to kind of mix their kava up with a branch of the kava, poking the thing. So what they do is they chew and then spit out these cuds of kava. Here's some guys chewing it away. And then, these are pictures back from the 70s and the 80s. And back then, you would strain your chewed kava through a kind of burlappy thing that grows around the fronds of coconut. So it grows around coconut fronds. So when the stuff kind of falls off the tops of coconut trees, and it's kind of a burlappy thing that you could use as a strainer. So they would pour cold water through the kava as the virgin boy is mixing it, and then it drips down into a coconut shell cup. And down on this island, the cups are quite large, and you would go off and you would drink your kava. Some of the original religious purposes of kava drinking still survive on this island, because these clearings where men gather every evening to drink their kava are also graveyards. So underneath the drinkers' feet are buried important ancestors. And drinkers, when they get to the bottom of their shell, and if it's been straying through this kind of coconut sheathing stuff, you get a lot of grit, in the dregs of your kava. You spit that out. And when you spit it out, you can utter a short prayer, like, please, ancestors, make it stop raining, or please let my political party win the upcoming election, or whatever you might say. And, my friends here are, completely, they're good Presbyterians, they converted 120 years ago, so they're good Christians, but they still, like many Pacific Islanders, believe in the presence of ancestral ghosts, and they often worry about what these ghosts might be up to. Are they helpful or are they harmful? So drinking kava, really, when you're drinking the kava, that last spit is a libation that falls on the bones of the ancestors buried under your feet, basically. And then you go sit down, and on Tana anyway, they just meditate. So nobody talks anymore, no more loud noises, sorry. And they listen, as they say, they're listening to the kava. And when they're listening to the kava, sometimes they are inspired. They hear things, that they'll attribute to ancestral spirits. And maybe the next day they'll share what they heard. Or they'll go back home, because the villages are surrounded, are located around these kava drinking grounds. They'll go back and they'll eat something. The wife will complain, oh, you're always up drinking kava, why can't you come home? They'll eat something, they'll fall asleep, and then they'll dream. And in their dreams, maybe they'll see their dead grandma, who will come and give them advice about something or tell them where to find a lost pig or whatever. So kava still has traditional religious purposes on this island and throughout Vanuatu. But it's also moved on to gain lots of recreational uses as well. So the old guys will drink their kava, they'll have one huge cell of kava, they'll go back and they'll have their dream. The young guys will keep on mixing and mixing. So you take these chewed cuds and you can kind of run water through them a second time or a third time to try to keep the high going. Here we see Prince Philip of Great Britain enjoying his shell of kava. It looks like somewhere in Vanuatu. I'm sure he's also drank it in Fiji. So one of the other ritual purposes of kava is if there's any kind of exchange or celebration where families come together, a kava always will be there. So they'll give gifts of kava, one family to another family, and then at the end of the day, those families will get together and they'll drink that kava. So this is a celebration to mark a boy's rite of passage, his official transformation from boy to man. They do that when the kids are 6, 7, 8 years old. They circumcise the kids. The kids are in seclusion for about a month or 6 weeks, and then when they come back in, they'll give heaps of presents from boy's family to his father's brother-in-law's family, basically. So they're bringing in decorated kava. Here's a decorated kava. And here's the poor little kid who is now a man. And on this island, since he's now a man, he can now chew kava for his elders, basically. And he'll continue to do that throughout his life. Or here's another ritual exchange of kava, again from southern Vanuatu. They have big regional ceremonies where one region will put together a bunch of dances and invite villagers from other parts of the island, and they'll have a 2-day dance festival. At the end of the dance festival, each dancer will offer up a big pig and a kava root to another dancer. So there's another reciprocal exchange of pig and kava. So kava, had many traditional functions, both as a medicine and as an important exchange good, but it's since become recreational. So when I first started to go to Vanuatu, back in the late 70s, if you go up to the capital town, Port VILA, you don't walk around at nights very much because everybody was, the guys, not the women, everybody was drunk on cheap Algerian wine, what they called vin plastique, because it came in 55-gallon drums out of Algeria. When I went back in the early 80s, suddenly I started to see kava bars appear, and there hadn't been any before. So it wasn't until the early 80s that somebody had the bright idea of not just using kava to cure something, or using kava to celebrate some boy's circumcision or a marriage or whatever, but you could sell it. So they started selling cups of kava in the settlements around Port VILA, in people's backyards. They would throw up a shed or whatever, and then they start putting up signs. So this says ready-made and strong, so you don't have to wait for somebody to chew it for you. Other parts of Vanuatu, they grate it, so it's only chewed on Tana and a couple of other southern islands. Most of the other islands will grate the root. But here, suddenly, you don't have to find some kid to chew your kava for you. You could go to a kava bar and pay 50 cents or $1 for a small cup or a big cup, and it says, "You're welcome to drink," and something, your friends, to talk about kava and business. Everybody's welcome, is what this sign said. Here's another one. So somebody's selling this is Port VILA, they're selling kava for 1,000 Vatu, which is about $10, a little less, per kilogram. Here's another one from the 90s. These are all, here's one from this year. And what happened in Port Vila is from 1982, when there was one Kava bar, now there are 300 or 400 Kava bars in a town of maybe 50, 60,000 people. So almost everybody in Port Vila, or many of the men anyway, at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock on through the evening are sitting at one of these Kava bars, and nobody's drinking wine anymore. And one thing that Kava does to you is it makes you peaceful. You don't want any noise. You don't want any fights. So the town is a far more pleasant place and quieter place, and that you don't have a bunch of drunks, boozed up on cheap wine wandering the streets. You've got everybody sitting in these Kava bars. And in Port Vila too, women now drink Kava. It depends on the Kava bar. Some of them are sophisticated, and they have a mixed clientele of expatriates and local people and tourists. Some of them kind of in some settlement backyard someplace are still more traditional, where you wouldn't find that many women. But its usage is spread, to both men and women nowadays. Here's one I took. It's the National Museum sells Kava as a fundraising technique. So you could go to the chiefs. This is outside the National Council of Chiefs house, where the National Museum people also sell Kava every evening. This is where a friend of mine lived, another Kava bar, Amical, which is a football team, so it's a Kava bar named after Amical, and the empty bottles behind him are for takeaway. So if you want to not sit around Amical Kava bar and drink your Kava there, you can pay for a plastic bottle of Kava and bring it home and drink it at home. So Kava is a Pacific thing, not everywhere in the Pacific, but much of the Polynesian part of the Pacific, Vanuatu, not in New Caledonia, not until recently in Solomon Islands, just a few places in Papua New Guinea. So it's also become a kind of national emblem. So here you see it on postage stamps, one from Vanuatu, one from Wallis et Futuna, which is a French colony, still a couple of little islands that the French control. Here it is on money. So there's a guy with a Kava bowl on a Samoan $2 bill. So what is Kava? So my co-author Vincent Lebeau and other folks, other botanists who have interested themselves in the chemistry of this plant, they figured out that it's got 6 kind of lipid molecules. They're kind of fat, related. They're a kind of fatty thing, like the milk molecules or in greasier substances. And these have been called kava lactones, and different varieties of kava and even different plants have different mixtures of these 6 kava lactones. And they're still trying to figure out what goes on in the human brain if you ingest kava. Here's some slides I stole off the internet. Memory lapse, maybe not so good, but pain relief sounds good. Mood stabilizing, anxiety inhibition, concentration enhancement, so you can hear those ancestral voices. Makes you sleepy if you drink a lot of it. It's also a muscle relaxant, so if you really have a strong cup of kava, your eyes will cross sometimes because the muscles that work your eyeballs relax, so you start seeing double. And if it's really strong, it's difficult to walk, but that's rare. Most of the time, you just get a nice buzz. And it's, nobody, they're still figuring this out. It somehow affects the emotional center of your brain, according to this slide here. So you get this 20 minutes, it doesn't last long, 20 minutes or 30 minutes of just feeling all is well with the world, you're at peace, and then it goes away. So you could see its importance as a way to resolve disputes. So there's a huge fight back on Tanna. The fight might go on for months, but when the two sides decide they want to settle things, they'll always drink kava together at the end of that day, and they'll feel together, they'll feel peaceful. and feel happy about each other, even though the next day they're going to be grumpy again. But during that one period when everybody's, feeling their kava, harum kava is what they say, they're at peace with themselves and with others. So it's a nice drug. I've never tried Valium, but I imagine it's a bit like some of the other serotonin whatevers that have been put onto the marketplace. So here's another slide: menstrual discomfort, headaches, mouthwash, maybe treating leprosy, I'm not sure, whoever created this slide. Increases mood, eases anxiety, boosts sociability. So in some places on TONGA, after you drink, when you're hearing kava, you're drunk with kava, you're not supposed to talk. But other places like Fiji and northern Vanuatu, Malakula, people drink it and they chat. So it could, you could use it in either way as a kind of way to improve what we would call meditation and mindfulness, or as a way to improve sociability. Here's the package, maybe one of the packages which is going on. So it's been marketed, and its connections with the legal systems have been interesting. So the Australians banned its import except a couple of ounces for personal use. Although just 2 weeks ago, they've changed the law because missionaries brought it into Aboriginal communities in Northern Australia, and it got blamed for cultivating lots of kind of intoxication and kind of bad behavior amongst its users. But people would mix kava with any single other substance they could find, including battery acid, and drink it all down to get high. And so it got a bad rap in Australia. It also got a bad rap in the European Union, where it was banned again until recently, where they've lifted the ban, although it's not widely sold yet in the European Union, because a couple of studies associated it with liver damage, although they weren't reliable studies, and the people whose livers ended up damaged were also using many other substances. So it's certainly been used in the Pacific for 3,000 years, and there's no reports of any liver damage. There's one attested symptom, which is heavy users sometimes get scaly skin. It dries out your skin, and if you're in Fiji and you see somebody with kind of scaly skin, it's probably a heavy kava user. The stories are that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration back in the Reagan years were going to put out an advisory, which wasn't a legal prohibition, but they were advising that it not be imported. But the then Prime Minister of Fiji, a guy named Ratu Mara, was a golf buddy of the then U.S. Secretary of State, George Shultz, and apparently they had a golf game together, and Ratu Mara convinced George Shultz to call up the FDA and say, back off kava. So it's never been illegal or even FDA advised against here in the United States. It's always been completely legal. And you can find it online. Increasingly, you can go onto eBay, or you can go onto Amazon, and you can find people selling kava. And it's been, here's 100% out of Vanuatu instant kava. Here's kava, and it's sold kind of in the American, it's been sold kind of in the American supplement and health food industry. So 10, 15 years ago, if you wanted kava, you could certainly buy it online, and it would be packaged together with other supplements that you would buy, in order to treat yourself. As you can see here, and here's the Australians being anti-kava, here the Europeans being anti-kava, but then the EU, about 3-4 years ago now, they reversed themselves. Although they're still blocking its importation into the EU, saying, well, we want to see some science, before you can advertise it as good for anxiety, we want to see some scientific studies. So they're waiting for science to kick in, theoretically. The conspiracy theory is that European pharmaceutical companies, big pharma, don't want Kava to come in because it will trash the market, for their antidepressant pills, will lose market share because people will just turn to Kava instead. As Kava has become more popular, people in Vanuatu and elsewhere have been concerned about what's called biopiracy. Maybe this plant is becoming so popular now around the world that other people will take it and plant it in Costa Rica somewhere, and we Pacific Islanders will lose control of our heritage plant, basically. And this certainly could happen. And there are well-known cases of so-called biopiracy, where a plant which has been a traditional cultigen in one place or another place in the world, suddenly becomes marketable and everybody moves in, whether it's, neem trees. I'm not sure what's up with the rosy periwinkle or whatever. So my co-author, Labo, who's still in Vanuatu, said, the best way to, or one way anyway, to confront other people moving in on the market is to treat Kava like the French treat their wine, and talk about the terroir, if I can say that en français, that the best Kava comes from this soil, or the best Kava is like Cabernet Sauvignon, or it's like Pinot Noir. You've got to have the right varieties. So you could combat everybody and his brother trying to sell Kava out of Costa Rica or out of wherever by saying, no, that's lousy stuff. You need to buy the noble varieties of Kava, which you can only find in Vanuatu. Or you need to drink Kava, which only comes from our soil, basically. And it may work. So, let's see if I could find this one. Yeah. What's happened in the last 10 years, so go back 15 years, lots of Americans were using Kava, and they were using it as a kind of health supplement, and they would buy it, in their health food stores, either in pill form or powdered form. But in the last decade, Kava bars now have sprung up around the US. So just like in Port Vila, Vanuatu, you or we here in the US now can go to our nearest Kava bar, in the evening and enjoy shells of Kava. And somebody's put together, I don't know if this map is searchable. Yeah, a map of a couple of hundred Kava bars that have opened up. I've been to one in Denver. Apparently there's one in Kansas City, if anybody wants to go up to the Mana Bar in Kansas City. That may be the closest one to us. So I was joking, it might be a retirement project for me. I can open up a Kava bar in Tulsa. But there are more and more Kava bars here in the US. So I was, last month I went to this one in let's see if I go back to my slideshow. In New York, down on 12th Street in New York, and I paid $7 for a shell of Vanuatu Kava. I felt a little bit of it. One of the other effects of Kava, it numbs your tongue. So I was always sorry for those poor kids in Tana who are chewing the root because they end up with a numb mouth. And I managed in my years of living on Tana not to chew much Kava because it's always more polite to chew your friend's Kava for him. And they never trusted my chewing abilities anyway, so I I reciprocated with a lot of free cigarettes and other gifts I could give people to chew my kava for me. But yeah, so New York, here's some friends, and I went to the Euphorbia Kava bar down in New Orleans. Here's one outside the University of Hawaii in Honolulu. You can get kava, coffee, and Wi-Fi. Here's me looking a little bit drunk with a couple of friends in one of the Denver kava bars. Here's me and another crazy French friend down in San Diego, and the sign again from Denver. Here's me looking horrible. This is before I drank at one of the San Francisco kava bars. And here's Kava, which showed up earlier this year in Dilbert. So I figure, when something has hit Dilbert, it must be real. That's the story of Kava so far. We'll see how far it gets. So let me just jump back and summarize a little bit. Economists are interested in kind of global trade, going back several millennia, have noted that some of the most important global trade items in human history are drug substances. So that's coffee, that's tea, that's opium, and a lot of the impetus for creating trade networks is to circulate these substances that humans appreciate using. And some of human biologists, talk about, built-in human needs or built-in human desires. Well, we like salt, we like sugar. And many argue that we like to alter consciousness too. And whether that's biologically founded or whether humans have just, over the years, discovered that one way to get in touch with the supernatural or the world beyond whatever the world is that we live in is to alter one's consciousness. And this makes these drug substances incredibly important in religious experience. So, even in some types of Christianity, wine is involved, right? So there's a drug substance in the middle of, the Catholic Mass. Just as there's a kava, there's another drug substance in the middle of the event when people in Vanuatu are, listening for ancestral inspiration, basically. So no surprise that, every so often some new drug substance comes along and it escapes the region where it's first domesticated, first discovered, first used. So coffee, caffeine, tea, nicotine, tobacco, those are now everywhere. And it looks like kava, may join that small set of substances which, humans everywhere on Earth will at least have the chance to appreciate. Anyway, so thank you very much. I'm happy to